Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mic setting up week 7 in the OUA and all the action taking place across USports. And as always, so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing so well, my man. Not only do we have another great week of OUA football, a weekend, I guess, but we're doing our very first game day live of the year and probably going to be our biggest game day live yet because we are traveling to Ottawa to do it at the Panda Game, my man.
I'm so excited for this weekend. I am dreading Monday at work, but I'll know I'll be floating on a cloud, frankly, for the rest of the calendar year. Can't wait to talk about that one. Can't wait to be there. I think we put out some outreach on social media, but again, if you're hearing this, and as always, wherever you're listening, however you're listening or watching, thank you so much for doing so. But if you're going to be in the house, doing tailgate, let us know where the party's at pregame and what's going on during the actual event. We are so excited and so privileged again to have the opportunity to be there, but we will get to that game in a bit. Off the jump, Tom, you had to correct me or you had to verify that I was seeing the right thing or not seeing the right thing, which was that we didn't get a new top 10, but that's because the new top 10 is the same as the old top 10, which frankly, I mean, we just ran through it ourselves. Laurier, Western, Laval, Montreal, Saskatchewan, Regina, Bishops, Queens, St. Mary's, Ottawa. Based on the results last week, I feel like that, yeah, I think we were in unison. That tracks. I mean, our top 10s were different when we did our midseason check-in from this list. But putting that aside, based on the results we got in week 6 or week 5 in Can West, I don't have a ton to talk about on this one. I mean, what was your thoughts seeing the repeat on it?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. There's not a whole lot of people there's nobody on this list that actually lost, and the only teams that didn't lose were because they had bye weeks, so can't really fault them for not playing a game in that sense. So I don't mind this. My question to you, just to add a little bit of flavor into this, just to get a little bit of talking points, because Lord knows that's all we do is talk about football and possibilities. So obviously, we just mentioned it off the hop. We got the Panda game that's up and coming. Now, if Carleton somehow, some way manages to take out the Ottawa GGs in this game, which would be insane, but it was also insane to see Tristan Lefebvre throw for 500 yards. If that happens, surely they would be bumped out of the top 10.
Yes.
Who would you put instead of that?
Presumptively, or on the presumption, I should say, that Saint FX takes out Acadia, who I believe they have.
Mm-hmm.
Is that enough to get them in there? Again, the sort of,
You'd have 3 AUS teams in the top 10 if that was the case.
well, this carousel of AUS action between these 3 teams. Bishops is off this week. St. Mary's is undoubtedly going to pick up a win against Mount Allison. It's tough. I get it. It seems weird, and I know there's people out there pulling their hair out, or if they're fortunate like me to have the haircut built for speed. Then I get the frustration, but we have McGill going into Montreal, which, put aside that strange occurrence we saw of McGill with the big upset at home. They're not going to Montreal and picking up the win. And for Manitoba, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head who they're playing. Is it UBC that they're playing?
UBC. Yeah.
I would take Manitoba in that game. I mean, Jackson Duchinski, we got to figure out about that. I think their run game is good enough to be able to put up points on UBC without him. I think that's really the only way, unless accompanied with that theoretical situation. If we're going to throw around hypotheticals in which Carleton's beating Ottawa, I mean, if Guelph wins on homecoming,
Ooh.
no, they're not a top 10 team. They're not a top 10 team. I think it would be, it's tough because if you were to ask me who do I like better between Ottawa and St. FX, the answer is Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
And not to denigrate the possibility that Carleton picks up the win. Big rivalry games, Panda as big as any other. Strange things happen. if it's a product that Josh Jansen goes down with an injury, knock on wood and everything like that doesn't happen, or something cataclysmic happens to Ottawa, then I could, even more sort of fuel the fodder, which again seems like the recipe for how that would happen in the first place. So it's them or Saint FX. I am not terribly upset with the idea of those three teams being in there because there's really no one else with the case. I love these GGs though, so I'm not going to hold it against them if they go down in a competitive game against Carleton. If they get blown out by some circumstance, what I don't really foresee happening, it's not on my bingo card or on any of my backup bingo cards, then that would be worth the discussion. So I think that possibility of loss still doesn't occur without them doing some really positive things in that one. What do you have an answer for your own question as well?
No, I was just kind of going back and forth into it. And once again, it's not a standings list like you have championed for so long, but I just don't feel very confident with anybody else kind of at that middle tier, I guess you could say, or like everybody else down to really justify putting them up top there and getting into that. I mean, even if whoever comes out of that Manitoba UBC side of things, both squads have struggled so much throughout the season that I don't think I'd really feel confident in being like, oh no, you can base it on like this one game where they look really good and then putting it in there. And a Saint FX squad that seems to be really dominating and doing their thing. It just the idea of putting three AUS teams in the top 10 seems wild. But if it's the best team, you got to put them in there.
Well, and on the ELO ranking, Saint FX is at 10 and Ottawa is at 11. Don't know, again, all the full calculus that happens within that, but worth taking that into consideration. I will say this, though. If Ottawa does lose the Panda, and I'm going to go ahead and spoil my pick and say that, Windsor's probably going to lose to Western this week. If the following week, Windsor goes to Ottawa and picks up a win there, that could possibly do a little flip-flop with those teams. But there's so much else that's going to happen between now and then that I don't want to say anything too declarative about that. But Windsor's also is really that next team up, unless, again, if Guelph just goes on a run right now, or if in sort of lockstep with Carleton in the hypothetical of picking up this win, really picks up momentum and goes on a bit of a run. I feel like much like the other conferences, the OUA, really aside from the AUS, most of the conferences are really starting to, I think you said it last week, the cream is rising to the top, or whatever the metaphor goes. I think we're starting to really know who are the contenders and who the pretenders are. But there's still a lot of time for some stuff to just have us going absolutely bonkers, because that's been the story all year long. Tom, you brought to my attention, though, before we jump into it, a really awesome comment we got on the YouTubes from Paul and Kitchener. Like we're doing a radio broadcast. I love it. Paul was asking about how back in his day, we think we're old when we do the back in our day. Paul's taking it back to the 90s playing at Laurier, also retired teacher. His question/comment is that back in his day, they used to do an out-of-conference game, 7 regular season, 1 exhibition, and just kind of talking about how that created that general interest amongst getting a vibe for who's really the big contenders throughout the league. And I think you were sort of posing it to me as someone who, in my time at Guelph, got to have those opportunities going to Saskatchewan. Well, I didn't make the roster to go on that trip my second year, but nonetheless, going to Montreal the year after that. Or no, in our third year we went to Western. My fourth year we went to Montreal. Fifth year we went to Manitoba. I mean, as you raised, it's just a dollars and cents thing, because it's clearly a great idea. Would I sacrifice a game of the regular season to do it? I think I might. If somehow that made the money work, where it's like, okay, we can do an out-of-conference exhibition, but it's gotta come at the cost of a regular season game, I think I might do that. I feel like for other conferences, though, losing a regular season game may be a bigger factor with the smaller conferences. For some reason in my mind, the math makes more sense that when we have the 11 teams, if you don't end up playing one of the teams in that sort of bottom tier, it's not the end of the world. I think you can still be pretty declarative. Take the AUS, for example, because of how we have these 3 clubs seemingly so neck and neck, transient property of one beating the other beating the third, so on and so forth, where if all of a sudden we lost one of those matchups the second time around, that would probably be a bit of a bigger loss of really recognizing who the top dog is, but at the end of the day, that's why there's still playoffs. So you still
Mhm.
get to sort it out. I know you
Yeah.
obviously got a lot of out of conference games just by being on a great team. I imagine your feedback is similar in that regard, but would you give up the game as well, or would you keep it in, or would it not be worth the sacrifice?
So I would love to see out of conference games like this. The issue comes into play where you either, like you mentioned, you're either sacrificing a regular season game to make it an exhibition game to go about that, or you are adding it into being a regular season game and then doing cross conference outside of that. The issue that comes into play there is you'd have to be very specific about who plays what from a certain setting here because you could be in a real tight race, especially in some of these other conferences. Let's take the AUS for example, in those three-team race. Now suddenly you're doing an out of conference game, and let's say Saint FX has got paired up to play against Waterloo, and you've got Bishops that's paired up to play against Saskatchewan. Now, I'm not taking a shot at Waterloo, but you could absolutely say that Saskatchewan is a better team than Waterloo is. And so now you start doing, well, we now have to weigh this properly because, they played an out of conference team, but they lost to them, but that team was, and it just creates a whole lot of headaches from that regard. Um, the other aspect of this as well is that the OUA is the only conference that only gets a 1 week training camp because we have 2 weeks and then we're right into it. Everybody else gets three, technically 2 weeks of training camp, and then you're into your first week of prep going into that. So you could technically start looking at doing some out of conference action from that regard because you've got some more room to play with. And typically speaking, even in that first week of training camp, at the end of that, you're always playing against somebody. Even if you can't afford to go out and travel like you did or like I did when we went out to Quebec City and played against Laval my first couple years, you're still typically, even in your, what was it, your third year when you didn't play Western during the regular season, so you scrimmaged against them. So you're still actively trying to find a scrimmage game in there against a team that you're not likely going to play or not play till later on or whatever else. So if you could change that exhibition game into a cross conference, I think that's a win for everybody. But once again, that just turns into who wants to foot the bill of having a team from Ontario potentially fly out to out west or vice versa.
I wonder, are there possible cost-effective methods that would somehow look something like if a few teams, I mean, it's tough because when we talk about Can West, like the aside from OUA and RSCQ, like these aren't just provincial conferences. Because there's a part of me saying, is there a possibility where like if a few teams went out west from Ontario and then met up at like Mosaic with like a couple of the teams out west and did more of like
Like a
jamboree
jamboree? Yeah.
style to kind of get a vibe? Does that somehow like where they can maybe combine foot the bill and what have you, but then it still gets weird because of the geographic divide with those teams out west, but they're very used to getting on planes week in, week out, as are the teams out east. And so I don't know. It's tough. I mean, and not to really spend too much time in this territory of it as well, but by all accounts, universities are hemorrhaging money right now.
Hmm.
So it's we're not in a good position to be looking at those things happening, unfortunately, because I think that would obviously only further grow the game, and you could see the take of saying, look, invest this money in now, knowing that you're not in a great spot, but recognizing the opportunity this would have to be able to then, in the investment for down the line, future returns, so on and so forth. I'm not going to hold my breath in saying it's going to happen anytime soon, but we'll certainly keep banging that drum on hoping to make that happen. Much like I'm going to keep banging the drum on these USports stats are absolute garbage right now. How have we not fixed this, people? What are we doing? What are we doing?
So I did get some information on that, on the stats themselves. This is a brand new system that's now in place that the old system that they had previous to this year,
Worked?
you, No, they literally needed a separate computer, a modem that was from like the 90s in order to properly utilize. It was a archaic system. So eventually at some point you have to come into the 21st century. And with that, there's been a fair bit of bugs. And from my understanding, to fix everything would require a deep dive into disassembling and really going into the back end of this, and that would just crash all of the stats to begin with. So it's a larger issue at play, and they're going to need more time to actively fix it.
These teams have played 6 or 5 games. Add the numbers up, divide them, and give me the damn rushing average. Like, I don't care about bugs in the system. Just do the math. Like, honestly, remind me to message Dakota that, like, I think we just need to do a post. We're going to spend an hour. We're going to count up the numbers, add them together, divide them up, and then we will be your home for USports football and stats for the rushing game. It's bloody disgraceful. I don't care about the bugs. Somehow the OUA TV took a step back and not, the rewind fast forward thing, which is such a pain in the butt. You're you're getting close here, OUA USports. You're pushing it. You're pushing it with me, okay? You're darn lucky I love this game so much. So let's start talking about the game itself, because the more we talk about everything but the game, the more I want to won't even go there. Let's dive into the action with the OUA, and we're starting off in the Royal City, a game that we have been looking forward to, that has been on my radar for the last 10 years. The Guelph Griffins playing host to the Queen's Golden Gales on a Guelph homecoming in which they're celebrating the 10-year anniversary of our 2015 Yates Cup. Tom, I was going to text you in a code. I was going to save it for here because I thought it'd be fun to get your reaction. The over-under on times I'm going to start crying on that day is higher than folks who maybe don't know me that well. Probably very high, higher than they can imagine. You were messaging me about the people that are going to be there from that team that I'm going to be seeing. There's a factor as well of a number of students from my high school that are at Guelph who I had told them last year, I'm like, hey, make sure you're at the homecoming game. Like, I'm going to be there, and how cool that is, and just the full totality of life and football. And I know you've had similar moments with your McMaster Marauders in the celebration. Oh, he makes a face. He makes a face.
Not so much.
Oh. Y'all might have won the At the 55 Bowl this year, but that's an L for you, Mac. Tom, you've been part of so many championship teams. Whatever has taken place in terms of anything formally done through the university, or just the guys getting back together, bringing the band back together, I want to pass it to you first, because you were asking me about sort of my feelings and emotions going into it, and all I have is that I'm going to be feeling a lot, and I'm going to be very emotional. What's it been like for you as someone who's been in so many of these championship games in your career, and over the years, just getting those moments to reconnect? I've seen my guys over the year, absolutely, but nothing nearly this formal. And from the look on your face from a moment ago, maybe you haven't either, but maybe you can give me some insight into what I'm in store for in this.
Yeah, I mean, for the folks who know, even just purely coming together as a football team in a university setting or anywhere that you're playing at a high level, and working together so cohesively and being physically together for so long, you just naturally build some kind of a brotherhood, a family atmosphere. Like, it's the best way that I could kind of describe it. But from the outside looking in, it doesn't make a lot of sense. One of my very best friends in the world came from my time at McMaster, and in our first year, he was another offensive lineman. His name is Tyler Goldsworthy, and he and I are going back and forth for the last dress spot, and we're like the sixth or seventh offensive lineman going back and forth, and he gets the dress a few times, and I get the dress a couple of times, and then we look at each other and we realize, oh, it's either you or me here. And anywhere else or anybody else, you could kind of think of that as like, oh, you must have hated each other. But it just created this man, I'm so happy for you. Like, you're the guy dressing here. Go out and kill it. Yeah, you too, man. And we just had this bond of we want to play with each other. We want to wait for our time and come together. And that 2014 year was the first time that we had started on the same team together. And then he's one of my best men at my wedding, one of my groomsmen. And then you have a chance to get together with a bunch of the guys. And even this last game at the 55 Bowl was also McMaster's homecoming. And so after we win, we go into the locker room to sing a song, and it's so many of my teammates from the 2011, 2012, and 2014 teams. And it's big hugs, it's jubilation, it's everything, man. And it's difficult because there was some new people getting in charge at Mac at the time of our 2014 reunion last year, so it unfortunately wasn't able to happen. And the 10-year anniversary of our 2011 team was COVID
True.
2021.
Yeah.
So we didn't get a chance to really honor that properly, but to have that setting, to see all those guys and just to reminisce, because there's so many times where you and I can connect about, the championship feeling, what it's like to hoist a Yates Cup and just the concept of that and what that meant. But it's another thing to look at being like, remember when we did that? And you're looking directly next to a brother of yours and being like, yeah, you remember when we played against Western in the Yates Cup and when we beat them on their field, an experience that you and I both have to win the Yates Cup. But that feeling of being able to talk about it like we were in the same meeting rooms together, we were in the same locker room together, we were on the same field at the same time, it's another level of connection on top of that, and I'm so excited for you to experience that, my man.
No, I appreciate that. And, from the guys that I know who are going to be there, you know, those specific connections. That's those. It'll be very fun to see everybody. But in my mind, there's like a half dozen to a dozen guys I really just hope are there. Just to all those things you said, to be able to reconnect. Where's life taking you? Where are you at now? It's a beautiful thing, and I'm so excited for it. And obviously, it would make it that much better of a day if we get a Guelph win. But let's go through the means by which we get there. We have two teams coming off 50 burgers that they laid on to their opposing teams in York and Carleton for Queens and Guelph, respectively. I think we've seen in both cases for these two clubs teams that can put up a lot of offense. Queens that's been more consistent in having the points reflect that offense. Guelph that's been a bit hit and miss, where at times they move the ball but they don't finish. We know that the kicking game has been, we don't need to pull punches on it. It's been poor this year for them, a product of why they're coming away in some of those drives empty-handed, but nonetheless still not finishing in the end zone as much as they'd like to. One of my comments from that Carleton game was that although you give so much credit to the defense for setting the offense up, the 4 picks by Johnny Green, point in case, but that you finished, that yes, you got the hand in getting there, but Guelph hadn't shown much difficulty or hadn't been a team you were worried about whether they could march the field. It was whether they were finishing in the end zone. For Queens, we've seen it all year long. They can march the ball. They can score points. Again, I know we've seen them lose to Laurier and to Western. I do think they are truly that only other team that we can really feel like they could give those teams a shot. Does it feel like both these teams coming off of big offensive outputs that's the type of day we have in store for this one? Or is it a day that defense prevails? For Queens, we know that defense is as good as anyone in the conference, as good as anyone in the country. And for Guelph, we saw, as we alluded to, their best defensive performance, but a defense that, especially with how good Queens runs the ball, I'm very nervous about. Does it feel like a big offensive day with what we just saw with these clubs, or are those defenses going to show up to play in a much bigger fashion?
Well, what I will say is that if we do see a big offensive day from both teams, it will be unbelievably impressive on the Guelph Griffin side of things, because this is one of, if not the best defense going right now in the Queens Gales, that will have Justin Pace back in the lineup and Coach Snyder back as the head coach, and anything else that would have happened from there, they're going to be at full force in this one. So I'm more inclined to say that defenses will prevail in this one, to be honest with you. I think that The way that this Queens team in particular has been playing, with how well they're able to rush the quarterback or even stop the run, playing a 30 front has just been insane. Letting those linebackers fly around and then getting a Keegan Vanek, Ashton Miller Milan's son, and Ian St. Arnaud and those guys in the back end, and how well they've been able to cover off some of these star receivers that we have in this league. I just can't see Guelph really going off. Certainly, I see them scoring points, and certainly I see them moving the ball. It's not like Queens is invulnerable in that setting, but to see another 50-point game from Guelph, I think would be a big stretch.
Yeah, that, I realize I'm the one who put the question out there, and I'm gonna scoff at myself for even asking it because I think this is a terrible matchup for Guelph offensively
Yeah.
against this Queen secondary. And then, as we talk about often, when you have that much confidence on either side of it, whether saying that you can play light boxes and shut down the run, commit to the pass game, or shut down with man coverage and little support over the top and then commit to the run game. I really feel that in every aspect, the DBs versus the receiver group, that's a win for this Queens team. And in terms of the front seven, I don't know if you've heard any word about whether that O line is that much healthier. Obviously, having Mitch back in was a boon for them to say the least. I feel that much better if he's back at left guard. Ethan Pyle's in there. I'd say based on them being banged up, I'm giving the edge to Queens in that regard as well because it's a backfield that's also very banged up. At full strength, that might be a really good matchup. As it is, banged up, I certainly want to go to Queens's favor. Plus the fact that like the difference between the secondary play for Queens and the receiver play right now for Guelph really isn't that close in my estimation. So even if it were a bit closer, and it is a bit closer in the box play, the fact, as I started with, that you can then overcommit to slowing these guys down. And again, a guy in Jared Seaway, whose name I think we sometimes, forget and bring it up as another really strong coverage guy for them. It's tough to think of how Guelph is going to attack them. It's also very exciting because I don't want to be fatalistic in saying that Guelph's not going to put up points. You're absolutely right. I would be surprised if they can't get things going. But as someone who, offensive mind, but not in comparison to the great minds we have here, I look at this matchup and I'm like, if I'm holding the reins for Guelph offensively right now, I'm not entirely sure. Aside from just saying, let's just go for the philosophy of what is our best play and don't worry about how do we match up against them or what can we do to exploit them. Let's just do the things that we know are our best plays and hope that our best can beat their best. Because I don't really see, and as we've both kind of commented on it, against one of the best defenses we have going right now in the country, where you can say, this is where we attack them. You just have to hope that you are playing your best offensive football and that you're able to make some big plays.
Yeah, if I'm looking at this once again, like you mentioned, as the guy holding the reins for this Guelph offense, to be honest with you, I'm focusing like hell on running the ball. I think that even with a somewhat banged up offensive line, that's still one of the best O lines that we have in the conference here. And while, yes, that's a phenomenal front seven, I think having my best going up against arguably their best and seeing who can win that battle, I like that a lot. I think even if Ethan Pyle is not in, I would not be surprised to see Queens go into more 40 looks rather than 30 looks. On the 40 look, you have one guy head up on your center, and right now that's Mitch Schretchinger, one of the best O-linemen that we have here. If you go into a 40 look, you spread that out a little bit, and yes, the one tech is going to get double teamed a lot, but you have a three tech now that's going to be one-on-one against one of the guards. One of them is Daniel Hosevar, who is a phenomenal, and the other one, if Ethan is out, is Riley Brackenberry, who is, I believe, a first or second year player as a backup. So obviously you have to be good in order to play on this Guelph Griffin offensive line. Coach Mike isn't recruiting no scrubs in this one, but that youth I think will come into play a whole lot as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more of a 4-3 look from that regard to try to take advantage of that, but using that almost to your advantage and creating more double teams there, making sure that if you're running the ball in those zone looks that Guelph likes to run, you get that double team, you work, and for the love of God, get up to second level and block pace, make sure you got an alignment on him. But using just leverage in that regard and getting that going, I think you have a good shot there. Even if it isn't a 30 front, yes, you've got linebackers at second level, but regardless of who's coming at you, you've got a double team on that nose. You're going to have another all lineman who's coming up there to one of the linebackers interior. Even if they are coming downhill hard at you, you still got a chance. So to me, I'm focusing on that, especially with even despite the fact that Donovan Malloy has a broken hand, he's still running the ball pretty damn well. Let's feed that dude and let's get him down the field.
And I think going hand in hand with that idea of, working out of the run, because, yeah, it is clearly the best thing that they do right now. Guelph does have an X factor on their offense that really no one else does, which is the Marshall McCray factor, where this might be a game where I'm not saying you bench Abood by any means, but it's he does open up a whole lot more in that rushing attack, that if that's where you're gonna really look to attack, you might get some good looks with him in there. Again, I'm really fascinated to see what Coach Soria and his offensive brain trust comes out with this game, with his game plan against you arguably say a rejuvenated Queens team with Justin Pace coming back in the fold. Let me throw this your way though, because I don't want to say been skeptical of Alex Vreeken. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, just the bar of where this team could be is very much either set, limited, or pushed based on what he can do with those guys around him. We see that at his best, it's one of the best in the country, but that consistency has been something that you've been wanting to see. This is a Guelph secondary coming off of their strongest performance against a passing attack in Carleton that we know has really good pieces, came off their best game of the week, and Guelph played phenomenally. Fairly confident that Kasari can do some pretty awful things against this Guelph defense if they so choose to do so. But the matchup between Alex Vreeken, his host of weapons he has at receiver, and this Guelph secondary, looking at that in specific, assuming they're not just handing the ball off every single time, as someone who's been, again, not critical, but trying to see that consistent top play from Alex, what are you looking for in this one against the Guelph defense that, with Demetrius Masuka really coming into his own with that Sam linebacker position, has perhaps given them a little more, has maybe solidified that defense a little bit more in the back end of late?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that I've been harder on Alex Vreeken than you have been. And I'd say I've been harder than most, but it's really just you and me talking about OUA football. So. But no, I think the world of that young man. I think that if he plays at his best, he could be one of, if not the best quarterback that we have in this conference. I just haven't seen that consistently from him. But in this, you've already showcased what Nathan Falcone and Russell Weir and the rest of that outstanding receiving core can kind of do. To me, I think you use Tuioti a little bit more. I know that Demetrius Masuka is back in that lineup at that Sam position for sure, and he's playing pretty well, but comparing to Tuioti, he's still pretty light. And getting a big body like that in the passing game a little bit more is definitely an easy way to get that going. But not just that, I think last week we saw, hey, what happens when you just get Russell Weir a little wide receiver screen and give him a little bit of space? He takes off with it, makes a couple guys miss, and he's gone for that 84-yard touchdown that he had. And Nathan Falcone and something similar with an 83-yard touchdown that he had as well. So I think that if I'm going into this, you're looking at this as Alex Vreeken and you're saying, I don't need to win this by myself. I don't need to throw a back shoulder fade that's only in a perfect spot. That's, I'm fitting the ball into the size of $1. But I need to be playing solid football. I need to be playing my best because, like we just saw last week, yes, it was one guy, but he's a factor of a defense. If you start getting that ball to fade a little bit, or if that ball's not completely accurate, this Guelph team will come down with it and take it back and a house call it if need be. And there's nothing better for a homecoming crowd than to see a pick six happen in a tight game or in a big game against a team of this caliber here. You will ignite the crowd. And if that hill is packed at Guelph, I can tell you from experience, it's going to get a whole lot more difficult to run a ball if those guys are involved in the game.
Oh, it's not if. You know that thing is going to be slammed. Tom, last well, not doesn't have to be the last thing, but the last component obviously is the special teams matchup. It is a landslide an aggressive word, but I guess I already said it. A landslide to me of a difference between what Queens shows and where Guelph's at right now. Already alluded to the kicking game being a bit of a mess for Guelph, and I think that if you were going to play out the scenario of the likelihood of Queens blowout versus Guelph blowout versus Queens winning a tight game, Guelph winning a tight game, the likelihood of Guelph winning comes in the form of a tight game, but wins in tight games often mean, or yeah, often mean that your special teams are on point. They haven't been showing that with really any consistency in the kicking game. We know what Queens can do with Tyler Mullen, Matt Driver as their kickers and punter, with the returners they have. And as you've talked about with Coach Taggart as one of the best young coordinators in that department on specials we have going right now in the OUA. And I'd be willing to guess in all of USports. That to me is as big a discrepancy between these two teams right now as really any I can picture.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on that one. If for no other reason than just the pure kicking aspect of this, even in the win against Carleton last week, Trey Thompson goes 0 for 2 on his field goals and 7 for 8 on extra points, missing one of those as well. I can't remember if it was missed or blocked, but anyways, it just doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence. And I have gone on record multiple times and said, if you really want to beat excuse me, the top teams in the OUA. And I think Queens is fighting for that top spot in the OUA. You don't beat top teams by field goals. You got to beat them by touchdowns. But also you got to get points however you can. And if you're not confident in your kicker kicking field goals, man, whoo, you got big problems.
Well, just to say quickly, I mean, two missed field goals and an extra point is a touchdown you're leaving off the board. So, however you add up to it, that is a major piece of scoring.
Yeah, 100%. So that side of things, you've got to clean that up at bare minimum. On the punt and kickoff coverage, I think that's kind of where I'm most nervous for these Guelph Griffins, because we've seen teams take house calls back, and we've seen a lot of, even if it's not a house call, it's still a great return, 40, 50-yard return, setting up an offense in great field position here. And we talked about the passing game. We talked about Alex Rieken and Falcone, Russell Weir, and the rest of that passing attack. And you mentioned it, but we do have to say, I think this is going to be a big game for Kasari. I think Jared Kasari is going to be on the ground. I think he's going to do a lot of really great things. And when you've got a defense that's already struggling to stop this young man, and you look out and you're going, oh, our special teams just gave up a 40-yard return, and now we're starting with this young man at the 50-yard line, and we got to try to stop him, rather than pinning them deep and saying you got to go the length of the field. Obviously, you always want that regardless of the situation, but when it's Kasari running the ball and doing his thing, you need every advantage as you can going into this. So that very well could be the turning point in a lot of these games. Oftentimes when it comes down to some of the top teams in the league, it is special teams that is the turning factor here. What I'm hoping for most in this game is that Guelph stays in this fight and really does their thing in the first half to get that crowd going. We know how difficult it can be with big crowds, especially in homecoming. You come up for the first part of the game, you're kind of sauntering in the first quarter, and then you're looking around, and if the game's not exciting, or if something's not going on, or even if it is exciting, sometimes you get that crowd and starts to file out at halftime because they want to go to another party or something along those lines. But if for no other reason, if you can get that hill, the grandstands are always pretty good about being loud. But if you can get that hill involved in this game and get them loud and get them cheering when Queens is trying to operate on offense, that's one of the biggest advantages you could have for Guelph. And it's why homecomings at Guelph are so damn difficult to play and win in. I know from experience.
To the students in Guelph, Trappers Palace is already going to be packed at kickoff, so you might as well just stay for the whole game, because you're going to be standing in line to get in anywhere downtown when you eventually make your way out there. Tom, as you were kind of doing the run through of the various areas of difficulty Guelph's had on their specials, I also just was having flashbacks of that Laurier game with their kickoff team, which whether it's punt coverage or kickoff coverage, Laurier is one of the best. Of course, when you have number 11 Laomi as one of your key gunners, you're gonna have a bad time. But just in all the multitude of ways in which we've seen Guelph struggle on that side of the ball, Tom, in 6 games, I've picked 2 Guelph games correctly. One, and frankly, a game in Windsor that could have gone either way, and the other one picking incorrectly with them getting a win. So, in my estimation, that's me picking that game correctly. So I'm gonna stick with the mojo of saying I'm gonna be in a win-win spot either way. Because I've already called my shot on this one a few weeks ago and haven't moved off this position by what I've seen with these two teams. I'm taking Queens to come on the road into our house on homecoming. And I don't like this matchup right now. I really haven't liked this matchup in a few years for us. I'm curious to, again, we have Nez and Taggart, who part of that 2015 team, on that Queens staff. Frankly, they're all business. It'll be great to see them. We'll get to joke around and everything, but there's the part of me wanting to be like, deep down, is there any part of them that, but even in that 2015 year, there was one team in Ontario that could beat us, and it was bloody Nate Hobbs and his Queens Golden Gales, which I'll never forgive him for. I'm going to stick with Queens on this day.
Yeah, I have to say, I think it would be a pretty big shock if Nez and Charlie came out with their Griffin Yates Cup rings on the sidelines to coach this game. I don't think that's in my bingo card in this one, but
that could secretly be the biggest flex of them all to be able to say, like, I won chips for this school, and now I'm back here to kick you in the teeth.
I'm with you on this one, my man. I am taking the Golden Gales to come in and get this done. I think they are operating at a pretty high level right now, and like you kind of mentioned, and I'll definitely reiterate, Queens and their strengths are playing pretty well perfectly into Guelph and its weaknesses right now. So this is a very bad matchup, and I think Queens is going to come away with this one.
Let's move from the Royal City to the Kitchener Waterloo area. We got 4 1 o'clock games. It is what it is. Where the Waterloo Warriors are playing host to the York Lions. Waterloo coming off of a tough loss in Windsor, game that you were calling. The York Lions coming off a tough loss in Queens. Tom, this is a battle of 2 teams, one in York, one in Waterloo, let me say to begin with, where you have the devastating injury to Nick Orr. They've pivoted to the young kid in Emmett Ward. They already have a young running back in Vanderveen that they're working with, a slew of offensive weapons, a defense that's been good at times, and frankly better than we've expected. But overall, generally, young team trying to find their footing. And on the other hand, a York team that feels like they're falling apart at the seams, but came into this year with much greater aspirations. It feels in some way like sort of trains passing each other in the night. One in York that a lot of folks, ourselves included, and this possibility hasn't run its course of coming to fruition. I'm not nailing any coffins shut for the York season, but we have been seeing, in large part due to injury, and I think also, as we alluded to on the Week 6 review podcast, bit of the culture getting very tested right now. A York team that, generally speaking, you're probably selling some of your stock in that team right now. On the flip side, a Waterloo team that, player for player, talent for talent, you probably say, and it depends if they're healthy or not, but you probably are saying they're the weaker team, if you will, between these two clubs. But for all those other same kind of cultural team building aspects, and just from some of the things we've seen of recent weeks, 35-0 obviously isn't an ideal setting, but going into Windsor is rarely an ideal setting for opponents. But a Waterloo team that feels like we have more positive momentum about. So we kind of have a game where, just on paper, if everyone's healthy, it feels like there's a clear advantage. But 6 weeks into the season, with obviously the injury sliders not turned off, and with the factor of human beings in a sport that has a lot of emotions, a lot of interpersonal difficulty that people need to work through, and that's the thing that helps bond us together as teammates and brothers. 2 teams that are feeling like they're going in different positions, even though, as I said, on paper, there is a clear favorite in this game. Well, if they're healthy. What are you making of these 2 clubs with where we're at now on the tail end of the season, kind of going in different directions?
Interestingly enough, I think this is two teams that are still discovering themselves in a certain way here. Obviously, this is a York defense that has not been playing up to where I think Coach Knox's expectations for this defense should be and are. And this is a Waterloo team, and especially an offense that has had to put in a few new players into this lineup and try to figure out, hey, I don't think we can run the exact same offense that we did when we had Nick Orr in there because we got a young kid. And like I detailed on the broadcast, and I think on the review pod as well, a kid that has just recently turned 18 years old, which is wild to me. He's playing quarterback for I know UA team. You're trying to simplify the offense, and maybe you're making a little bit, you're making those reads a little easier. You're not overcomplicating things, and for a York defense that is certainly struggling with a couple of injuries out, specifically in that linebacking core, that could help and play into some of their strengths. But once again, you talk about where the best part of the heart of this team is for this Waterloo squad. It is on that defensive side for them. And certainly we've detailed it a number of times. The heart of this York team is the offense. And if anything, it is Keegan Hall. So I'll be interested to see the matchup between this York offense and this Waterloo defense in this regard. I know that Keyshawn Bone is going to be screaming off the edge, whether he is if he's at a defensive end spot or if it's at that Sam linebacker coming off, and seeing if they can get to Keegan Hall, because the best defense against a great quarterback is making sure that he's on his back so he can't throw the ball. But I'm interested in seeing what that matchup looks like.
I think that is really where the matchup does lay. And, for York, as we said, that's a great Queens defense, but, there's only so much we can do to not say protect Keegan, but at a certain point, a bad game's a bad game. Waterloo, though a good defense and where you certainly give them the edge because their offense has really struggled this year, and that's sort of even before the Nick Orr injury. A Waterloo defense that's certainly not the caliber of Queens. On the one hand, this does feel like it has the makings of, as I've said before, I don't know Keegan's full status in terms of whether this is truly his last year, if he could come back. Where, doggone, if there isn't part of me that's really wanting to see a vintage Keegan Hall game, just for the purposes of kind of, myself as much as anyone else, kind of being like, all right, hey, don't forget about like every incredible thing I've done for this league, and obviously shown really good things like for this York club, averaging just under 25 points a game. Certainly not what we expected going into the year. And yes, Avante's been banged up for them offensively and, still trying to find their rhythm. But does it just feel like Keegan just been going against some difficult defenses with an offense that, I don't know. Like, we knew the O-line was banged up going into the year. Melkus is actually, still doing a strong job even behind that O-line that's, less than stellar this year. They're actually rushing it pretty well, the same as Waterloo's been. And if we're going to identify one thing that Waterloo does sort of the best offensively, it would be that rushing attack. So in a way, York's step for step there, and then clearly has the better passing attack. Are you expecting like a revamped Keegan Hall game on this one, or do you see Waterloo, as you kind of alluded to, being able to make them uncomfortable? And if so, is that how they're going to have to do it, through the pass rush, or do you think they can play coverage against them?
I think the coverage side is going to be a very interesting spot here because I've really come to expect a lot more from this York receiving core. I mean, Avery Ford should be one of the best receivers in the country right now, and that may still be true, but the numbers don't really jump off the page and prove that. I mean, Nicholas Adair and what he's been doing, we've been big fans of Cairo Berry for a long time in that squad as well. Like, there's a lot of guys, obviously CJ Vincent, like really being able to do their thing. I think this York receiving squad should be doing a whole lot more. Maybe this is just a result of the offense and that it has to be run by Keegan. And because of that, it somehow takes away from the receivers. I don't know. Once again, we're not in those meeting rooms. We don't know for sure. But I have to assume that if Keegan's given time and these receivers are running crisp routes, that they are going to do some really great things in the back end. And while, yes, you talked about, the run stats and everything else, on the year, York has thrown for 1,500 passing yards compared to 500 rushing yards. I think there's a pretty big, heavily bias towards throwing the ball rather than anything else. And truthfully, when he was at McMaster, it was the same thing because when you've got a stud at quarterback, you definitely want to use them as best as you can. So I'm expecting this. I'm expecting Keegan to definitely step back there and throw the ball and rip it. I'm not 100% certain on what I'm going to see from that regard in terms of how well they're going to operate because, like you mentioned here, we were kind of expecting this passing offense in particular to be a whole lot more effective than what it has been this year.
I mean, yeah, it's been a bit of a of an odd thing. Partly, I wonder if the lack of the Avery Ford production that we're seeing, the I wonder if the Keegan Hall piece of it is just because he's orchestrating the whole thing, the maestro that he is. It's he's not locking in on one guy at a time. As you mentioned, CJ Vincent, they're kind of in the same neighborhood, but even still, it's a bit surprising that neither of them have really ascended as the guy for them. What's so interesting is that last year when we saw this matchup on York's homecoming, I believe it was a high scoring affair. I believe it was a Sean Lull versus Nolan Caban matchup, which I certainly don't think is the matchup we're getting on this day. So just sort of an interesting point of reference to kind of see how these two teams have flip-flopped. Certainly based on the defensive coordinators, it's like hell of a matchup to see in that realm. It's kind of like an at the 55 Bowl junior in Coach Knox versus Coach McNeil. On the special team side of things, I certainly have more faith in Waterloo as a product of my lack of faith right now with this York team, and obviously with Astolfo, the way he's been kicking as a freshman, that certainly gives a lot of faith there. It's a tough one to call right now because again, the fact that this York team kind of similar with Carleton, kind of similar with Guelph, these three teams I feel like we've had this year where even when they've been good, it's still sometimes left you feeling a little cold. And for Waterloo, it's been a very just it's only upside type year where the frankly as a product of the bar being set a bit low, and yes, obviously with the terrible injury to Nick Orr, that adds such a different element and color to it all. But it's one that I'm still kind of racking my brain about. I think the Waterloo being at home is certainly a major advantage because of how much that community comes out to support them. But I don't know, Tom, like what other angles are you looking at in this one from the standpoint of, aside from if we just see those guys from York that we've been missing all year appear fully dressed and things like that, what else are you looking to sort of discern in this matchup?
Well, I want to continue to see the growth of Emmett Ward and how what he's going to turn into as a quarterback. I mean, even because I had one of the best views calling that game last week against Windsor, along with the brilliant Brad Hedges, I saw an Emmett Ward in the first quarter, the first half, as a different player than in the second half, where now you're getting into, okay, we've held Windsor to a bunch of field goals. Obviously, Lidster kicked 7 that day. And at halftime, I believe the score is only 12 nothing or 15 nothing or something along those lines. So once you get one touchdown, you're right back into the game and you're in this despite giving up so many scores. But then to start off, or at least very soon in the third quarter, Wegby Mumbo gets in for a touchdown. And then Tyson Noel Charles gets in for a touchdown. And suddenly this game starts to get really out of hand. And when you start thinking, okay, if we want to get in this game, we got to get better, that desperation and that sense of urgency, you can see it come into the play of Emmett Ward. And you see him start to get a little bit more sporadic with the throws. But in the same vein, I saw a young quarterback where in the very first drive he gets a little bit of pressure and you see his eyes dip right down and he's looking at the rush and he tries to take off and run with it. And then the very next series, still in that first quarter, same kind of thing happens. He gets a little bit of pressure and his eyes stay up and he's looking for receivers downfield and he's trying to find somebody. And there's a chemistry that's a bit off here. There's a receiver that's coming into a curl and he sits in the zone, but because maybe it's because of the route or whatever, Ward thinks that he's going to continue on, and so they're off on the same page. They're not on the same page, and the ball goes a few yards to the receiver's side. Whereas if the receiver had kept running, he would have caught the ball. So little things like that to understand what a defense is going to give you if a receiver wants to sit in the zone rather than keep going. That's going to take time in order to develop. And the only way that's going to develop is by throwing more and getting more on the same page. So I think as this season goes on, and I think as Emmett Ward steps into this role and becomes this quarterback, he's going to get on a better page with his receivers. He's going to have some more chemistry there, and he's just going to get more game experience and bullets. But if this game gets out of hand quick in terms of York's being up 14 nothing, 21 nothing, or something in that vein, and you have to start, we got to start pushing the ball and getting aggressive with it. That's going to start spelling some stuff because Emmett Ward throws, I think, 2 or 3 interceptions in that Windsor game. He doesn't throw any of those until the second half because that's when they get into really starting to push things.
I suppose though one could respond, and I guess I will be said one to what you said about Emmett needing that extra time to build that rhythm with his guys, and obviously that's the case. But then I just think about York, and we've been saying that about Keegan and his guys for the whole year, and we already kind of went through not the numbers in detail, but the sort of less than stellar year his receivers have been having. So I don't know if I'm saying that to say that like as a way of sort of pouring cold water on the idea that you know what, it'll just take time and Emmett Ward will come into his own with this receiving core, or am I saying that you're absolutely right, that's how it should work, and as a result of the fact that it hasn't really worked with York, there's something just like something is amiss with this team this year that I can't quite, put my thumb on the pulse of. And we are alluded to it of a team that feels like it's starting to fracture a little bit. And I know I'm not here to, cast aspersions and lay that at the feet of anyone in specific by no means. But I just it's a team that's just I it's weird because it's this cognitive dissonance of living my whole life of saying York football, you don't want to, you don't trust it as far as you can throw it. And then they have a positive year last year with what Coach Janke's able to do coming into the program and Coach Knox. Then they make this huge move and bring in Keegan Hall, and these expectations arise. I don't know. There's just something clearly still not clicking with this team that gives me pause, but it's still, I can't fight the talent that's there to begin with. So it's difficult. Tom, I don't know if you have any other further commentary, but if you're ready to pick, I'm ready to call it on this one because I don't know too much else I want to say about this game.
Yeah, I think for the York side of things, you have to start getting, you have to get Avery Ford into the passing game, into this game a little bit more often. His stats on the year so far, 20 catches for 324 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's averaging 4 catches a game. With how good he can be, the receiver type that he is, the body frame, everything, and the speed that he has, I want to see him getting into that. And the difficulty when you get into a top tier quarterback like Keegan is, and even, you hear guys talk about the same thing with Taylor Elgersma last year, and that because he's so accurate and he can read defenses so well, a lot of the times he's not looking at individuals. Like he's not looking at an Avery Ford versus a Waterloo DB, for example. He's looking at, okay, my slot receiver is running a corner route and there's coverage in the back end, so I don't want to throw that. Rather than, yeah, there's coverage in the back end, but F it. It's Avery Ford. I'm going to trust my guy. I'm going to throw it up to him. So I would like to see that pushed a little bit more, especially with how well Keegan can place a ball. I think that's a big factor and something that, I wouldn't mind seeing. On the Waterloo side of things are already going to get difficult with a first-year quarterback, but I have reason to believe that Evan Basiliga is not going to be in this game. In that game against Windsor, he was off on the sidelines. It looked like he had a dislocated shoulder or something to that effect. So I don't think that he'll be in this game. And we've talked about Basiliga being that like outlet, that net for a pass in that regard. So with all of those things, I guess I'll get right into my pick. I am taking York on the road in this one to win this game.
I'm gonna go with you on that one. There's just the it's such a the cognitive dissonance going in my mind is so rampant where on the one hand I'm saying that there's more things I trust with York right now, but there's also at the same time more things I don't trust with them. But there's also the piece too I look at and just saying they got Western coming up, they got Guelph coming up. for as promising as this season started, this is a game they can't let slip through. And not that I think it changes how they prep for it, but there's always that aspect of when a team's really on the ropes back against the wall where they really need to come through with a W. Not to say it's not as important for Waterloo with still Mac coming up to finish up their schedule. Last home game of the season, but I'm there with you on the York take. Let's make a trip down to the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches, a little town called Little Rock, Arkansas, aka Wind City, Ontario, under the guidance, the tutelage, the mentorship of one coach, JP the Don Cercelli. The Windsor Lancers are hosting the Western Mustangs in what's a really exciting game in my books. Number one, we've seen really strong matchups from these two teams over the years in the Don's time with Windsor, even if the final score doesn't reflect it. A lot of games that are just punch for punch through 3/4 football. Obviously, to say the least, we know you need 4/4 of pretty darn flawless football to beat these Mustangs, but we've certainly seen it make for really good theater between these two teams. We talked about it in the matchup that you were calling last week with Waterloo and Windsor. The Greg Marshall coaching tree in just droves with this. Will Papa Marshall's in the house to sort of check on the affairs of his young Padawan in JP Cercelli. I love that aspect of it, and really getting to see for Nick Domofsky. Obviously, he's gone up against some tough defenses, but it's always great when we see these young quarterbacks get the test of going up against these top teams. Tom, you got to see Domofsky kick off his season in Kitchener-Waterloo against the best team we have going right now in the country in Laurier. When you think about the fact that he's going to be at home with a few more games under his belt with a Western team, a defense that's been getting better, but we still know isn't as strong as they probably need it to be for where they want to go, and an offense with a run game that's been head and shoulders above everyone in the country right now. What is it you're looking to see from Domofsky in a game where, hey, look, it's tough. Western's coming into your house, but we're seeing some progression from him. We've seen that he's somewhat aggressive by nature in his approach to the game, both in how he attacks with his feet and how he seemingly has that sort of idyllic 5-second goldfish memory that just allows him to take some shots and just try and give his guys some opportunity. Like we've seen from guys like Colby Ginn and Kareem Cotton and the likes in that receiving core. And obviously with Liam Talbot back in, Western's coming to town. Young kid Domofsky in the mix for Windsor. What are you looking for the young kid in this matchup this week?
I want to see him get a little bit more comfortable in that pocket and start to do some good things. It's difficult to say, yeah, I need you to start playing some of your best football against the Western Mustangs and against that defense. But I want to see that from him. You know, even against that game against Waterloo, like he does fine, but it's really not to where we've come to expect this young man to be. I mean, he goes 16 for 21, 210 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions. And I want to see some more from this young man. I want to see him get his receivers involved a little bit more. Even on the year, he's 64% completions. He's averaging 233 yards a game. He's thrown 2 touchdowns and 4 picks. Not exactly stellar numbers from a team that for a lot of years, and a lot of those years in the Don's tenure, that being close in those 3/4 playing against Western, is one solid quarterback away from winning big games. Still a team that needs to have some more consistency at quarterback. I think you've got the receivers that are good enough there, especially with Liam Talbot back in the lineup. If Andrew Delaney, he was out last game, if he can get back in the lineup, along with Wavy Mumbo, and then you've got Colby Ginn, Tyreek Quason, and the rest of those receivers that are there. Like, this is a team that should be able to really compete with people in the back end in the passing game, and just kind of hasn't as of yet. And I don't think that Domofsky has played his best game by any means. So you're going to need to play your best game in all 3 facets in order to beat Western to begin with. And I think it starts with getting this passing game up and running.
And if it was a straight literal track meet between these two teams, you certainly think that Windsor has a darn good shot in that. I didn't mention Tyreek Quason's name. I'm happy you brought him up. The speed that he brings to the table is outstanding, and partly why that aggressiveness you mentioned, what was it, 2 touchdowns to 4 interceptions. You don't love the ratio, but he's taking those shots because when you have these athletes, you want to give them opportunities. We already talked about in that last game with York, with Waterloo, with a young quarterback in Emmett Ward. and getting that rhythm, getting those connections. But at the end of the day, you still have to be willing to take those shots. And I think we've had this conversation before, either in the context of the podcast and OUA football, or just in our own coaching lives, where frankly, seeing a quarterback with no interceptions at times is as telling as someone who throws a ton of them, because sometimes that's meaning you're not taking those opportunities and taking those shots downfield. So again, I like that that's where he's at as a young kid. I mean, what is this? It's third year already. He just missed one with injury. Maybe it's even his fourth year. I don't know if he was in 2021 exactly. For Western, against this Windsor defense, a defense that's been stellar throughout the season in the early goings. Though again, I don't trust the stats defensively. Western's been running the ball like gangbusters. It's been one of their most productive rushing attacks in truly in some time, which is amazing to say about Western. From what we've been seeing so far with Windsor defensively, really liking what Piccione's been doing in the middle. Really like what we've been seeing from Ahmad Taylor on the defensive end, and obviously that slew of DBs that they have back there who, frankly, if we're going to talk about recent results from what we've been seeing from these units, that secondary for Windsor versus this passing attack for Western is one that I think is a pretty, close to a wash, if not. But in that rushing attack, my goodness, is that where obviously Western has a major advantage? And I'm sorry to folks if it feels like I'm repeating this question, repeating this sort of storyline, but like I guess there's two questions in this. Number one is, can Western get out of the OUA purely on saying we run the ball better than anyone else? And if the answer is no, like we're getting towards the end of the season, and maybe Western believes, and maybe deep down they say they know that they can flip a switch, and when that passing attack needs to come alive, they will do so. But Evan really hasn't been asked to do a heck of a lot this year, and we're seeing this team come off a game last week where, was Seth Robertson completely kept off the stat sheet? And again, they just ran the ball at will on Mac. They didn't really need to throw it around all that much. But it goes back to that first question, because if we don't think they can win it all solely on their rushing attack, well, at a certain point, you got to get that air game going a little bit. And I just wonder whether they need it out of necessity, whether it will be too late, because we've talked about it a few times as well. In addition to that there's not a step back's not the right word, but we saw a lot more creativity from them, both in their rush and in their passing game last year, that I feel like we haven't. It's just looked like just such a, like, hey, ChatGPT, make me a Western Mustangs offense. Great. We're running Power G downhill again and again and again in those inside outside zones that they do so effectively. I know I keep asking the same question, but is this the week we see them just tell Evan, hey, look, even if we don't need it right now, are we gonna at least see it? I mean, we've seen great things out of Jerome Rancourt's. I'll pull it up here in a second. I'm sure he's probably amongst the league leaders in touchdowns right now, but it ain't throwing the ball either. It's still rushing it. What do you make of Western's offense at this point, where their rushing attack is arguably the best thing that anyone can do offensively in any capacity? But I still feel like, if you compare them to Laurier, they're a much more well-rounded offense in total. And I think that's what you have to be able to be the best.
I mean, statistically or typically speaking, whatever you want to call it, for a generic team, yes, you'd have to be able to be well-rounded. In the previous years, not last year, obviously, because that was Laurier, in 22 and 23, we saw a Western team win a Yates Cup very heavily off of a run game. And seeing Keon Edwards and Edward Winati and Keanu Yazbek and those guys and really doing their thing and be able to get out of the OUA, obviously, in order to win a Vanier Cup, you had to face a couple of teams out of Quebec that kind of put a stopper on that, but certainly out of the conference, yes. And I think that this rushing attack is one of the best that I've seen from Western, at least as I've been covering it with at the 55, which is, like you said, a very impressive thing to be able to say, considering the greatness that they've had so far. But To me, the interesting part of this, it's not just the passing attack, it's specifically the connection between Evan Hillock and Seth Robertson that I'm curious about because they just don't seem to be on the same page as of right now, and it's kind of on both of them. I'm not just putting this purely on Evan's spot. I think there's been a couple of times where they've been expecting, Evan's been expecting a drag route for Seth to kind of sit in it, so the ball looks like it's underthrown for Seth, but I think he's expecting him to sit back in that. And then there's a couple of times where a ball is thrown and it looks like it's a solid enough placement, and then it hits Seth in the hands, or at least it's an awkward set. It's not perfect, obviously, but it's certainly a catch that Seth has made in the past, and then it kind of drops in that regard. And it's interesting to see because we saw it in the Guelph game when you and I were there, and Seth makes unbelievable catches when he is fully covered and still able to come away with this. And you haven't really seen that in the past couple of weeks here. And I don't know if it's a lull or what's going on between the two of them, but that connection has been missing. Now, Western being Western, when one thing's not going right, somebody else is going to step up, and not even just in that rushing game. But I think Braden Masseri is playing some of his best football so far. The game that he had against Mac in particular, 106 yards and 2 touchdowns, would really showcase not just the hands that he has with the corner route in the back of the end zone, but with the speed as well in one-on-one coverage, able to just kind of dance around a marauder defender and get into the end zone. So Masseri taking off at just the right time here, while the rest of that offensive passing attack seems to be trying to find its rhythm, is a great thing for this team. And I continue to expect Masseri to be that guy that if there's one guy that Evan needs to just throw up a ball to, it's going to be Masseri in this one. But there, it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, that Seth and Evan get back on the same page and that passing attack starts to look as lethal as it normally does. I don't know how long or what it's going to take for that to happen, but like you said, while I do believe it's only a matter of time, that matter of time is getting shorter and shorter and shorter as this season is coming to an end here. So you only have so much time to get into this. And with, like you mentioned, Windsor's defensive secondary being as good as they are, having Seth come in as either a drag route or an in across, kind of trying to involve some of that linebacker play against him. And if you get Seth on a linebacker, that's an immediate win. But I expect Seth Robertson to be a big part of this offense and be a part of the game plan here. So I want to see them get back on the same page and get things going again.
Totally. Or, at least like I don't have the numbers in front of me, like getting a big Dasani McIntosh game or Roman Campanero of, yes, Missouri has been on fire this year. And when you add in the contributions he does in the return game for them as well, he's been one of the most lethal ball carriers of any kind of ilk that we've had this year. Kind of expecting to see when it trickles down. But at the end of the day, again, if we're just focusing on this matchup, that rushing attack for Western has been so dominant. I mean, this is a team that's coming off putting up 52, their bye before that, and 63, then 55. It's been on fire, and as we've alluded to, so much so on the back of this rushing attack. Going back to the Windsor side of things on the offense, just for a moment, we saw the return of Liam Talbot, which was somewhat minimal in its overall impact on the stats. But as we kind of alluded to, and you're being there live and kind of having a better picture and feel for how the sort of totality of the offense functioned, it seemed fair to say that, stats aside, there was a marked jump, if you will, of just the general flow of the offense. Adding that factor in here along with the great things we've seen from Waby Mambo, all those receivers that we've mentioned so far. And against the defense for Western that is very young in some key spots, has obviously some incredible veteran players there. You've crowned Max von Muhldorfer as the best interior lineman in, I forget if it was the conference or in the whole league, but either way, it's a fair take to be able to make. And a guy in Richard Abdubafor, who's just one of the best cover guys and just big body defensive backs that we have in the league. For this Windsor offense against this defense with, just this really neat mix of wily vets and super young kids, with getting another week of Talbot back in. From what you've seen from other teams who've been able to move the ball in them a little bit, I guess I'm thinking about like Josh Jansen and his ability to score some points on this defense. Where is it that you see those softer I won't say soft spot in the defense because though it might not be as great as we've seen over the last years, I still don't want to denigrate it in any way. So some of those softer spots for this team and with what Windsor does, where do you think they can maybe strike there?
Well, it's difficult because we talked about it earlier here that we haven't really seen the best from Domofsky. We haven't seen from the best from this passing attack here, but I like the athletes that they have in that receiving core. I think getting Tyreek Quason in something like a 5 to 10 yard in that area out route where he's using his speed on a speed cut to get away from some of those Western DBs. I think that's where you could see some success. Western has a history of being great tacklers as well. So getting some separation in that regard to catch a ball. I'm not expecting a ton of yak yardage, especially when you've got guys like Thomas Silcox, like McKay in the back end, like a do before. They're going to come downhill, they're going to make tackles, and they're going to be pretty aggressive with it. But getting that separation with just some of those quick outs or quick ins or slants, that's where I think you're going to see the best bang for your buck here. I don't know that you're just going to outright outrun some of these guys, especially when you've got like a decathlete at as the safety spot. I don't know if you're going to outrun him in that regard as like a simple go route by any means, but using your route running abilities to get away from some of these guys, especially this young Western defensive secondary, I think that's where you could see a lot of success in this. It's still a very big ask because you see every time we come and we look at this Western defensive line, we say, solid for sure, but don't know about their pass rushing ability and whatever. And then Soren Holschmidt starts to pressure a quarterback like crazy, and he's right on the cusp of getting some sacks. And then Angelo Longo, for whatever reason, just coming up from that three tech spot, gets around dudes, and he's making sacks and getting pick sixes and just doing his thing at that three tech, and he's looking damn good while doing that. So this is a Western defense that, with Coach Gleason and how he coaches them, it ain't about, okay, you've got one guy that you have to worry about. It's, okay, this week we see this as the advantage, so we're really going to push this. Or this week we see this, and I want Jude Buchanan in there, and now I want Ferentino in there, and now I want anybody to make a big play in this regard. So it's not just like if you do this against Western, you're going to be set. It's going to take some time, and it's going to take the best game that Windsor has played so far if they want to win this one.
Yeah, it's amazing when the system is that good and when you coach them as well as you do and you recruit them as well as you do, that they can just throw guys in consistently week in and week out, and just it's why they're the best and it's why they'll be the best on this day. We don't need to overthink it. Going on the road to Windsor is never an easy task, but beating Western is almost never a task that folks can come up on the positive side of. Western on the road, I'm assuming we're in lockstep with that one. Yes, Tom?
That is correct.
Well, let's move on to our final game of the Saturday slate, where your McMaster Marauders, Tom, take a trip to the Big Smoke to take on the U of T Blues. Live from Varsity Stadium, 1 o'clock kickoff, as we mentioned a few times now, the final home game of U of T schedule. Tom, a MAC U of T kind of sneaky rivalry dating back a few years now, of a weird game in 2022 where U of T picks up the win at the end of the season. I don't remember all the machinations, but just weird stuff going on leading to a U of T upset win, kicking MAC out of the playoffs and securing U of T in the playoffs. A game in U of T the year after where that defense for U of T just came up massive and securing another win. And two teams right now who, at time of recording and just going into the weekend, time of recording has nothing to do with it, both sit with only one win apiece in a situation where right now, as we've alluded to it, 3-5 and the right tiebreakers is very much a live dog to get you into the playoffs. A very interesting matchup right now in a team in MAC that struggled to get their offense going so far this year, and a team in U of T that came out with flames shooting out their butts offensively and has really tapered off. A MAC defense that we've seen pretty consistent throughout the year, a little banged up though, and a U of T defense with some really key players in some spots, especially in that linebacking core, but overall has struggled to really produced consistently for them, and as well has been on a pretty unfortunate string of games over the last few weeks that has done, really not instilled much confidence in that club. And kind of similar with the York Waterloo situation, even though on paper they're not too far off one another, it just feels like they're moving in opposite directions. Mac, we have a lot of promise and belief in what they're building towards in UofT, where especially with the reality that this could be Scott Barnett's last hurrah, possibly his last home start, where we don't really know what direction this team's going on. What's your opening remarks, your kind of vibe check with your Marauders heading into Toronto for this one?
I think that this is a Mac squad that's got a lot of really good things going for it. I had a few people reach out to me over the weekend and talk about, man, like that a Mac loss to Western, and this is they lost 55 to 22 and all of this stuff, or 52 to 22, whatever it was. And you go, yeah, that's a bad end score for sure. But when you watch this game, when you watch how these Marauders were able to do some things, there's certainly a lot of things to be excited about. I don't think anybody who's watching this MAC team and watching this Western team, even at the beginning of the season, thinking if both teams played their very best, Western is still going to come away with this one. And I'm not surprised at the result by any means, but I mentioned it on the review pod, but I was texting you during the game when I was live in person watching things, being like, I'm seeing a MAC team in the first quarter when the game is still very, very tight, moving the ball down the field and almost doing it at will and finding soft spots in the defense and nickel and diming the way, getting all the way down into field goal range and then kicking a field goal and seeing a lot of good things. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. And yes, it's an offensive line take, and who cares about offensive line, but we do, damn it. And we're the ones with the mic, so you got to listen. I confidently, very confidently think that Christian Cote is going to be an OUA All-Star. The only thing that I think might be hurting him is the fact that he started off at guard and then has moved out to tackle. But him at left tackle, he has been playing some phenomenal football. His technique, his footwork, he looks really impressive to me. And I think using him on that left side, I think they're really going to start leaning on him and trying to get things going. I would still love to see a run game really come to fruition in this one. Haven't really seen a whole lot of a MAC run game, despite the fact that we are seeing more attempts at trying to run the ball, which I do appreciate from that side. So I think this is a MAC squad that, while yes, you look at it on paper and you're going, oh, they're 1-4. I think they're in a pretty good spot, to be honest with you. And I think they're building and they're coming to a peak at the right kind of time. Obviously the game against Western that just recently happened, it is what it is, and like I mentioned, but I don't think people truly understand how big, and I don't mean to say this just to harp on you again, my friend, but how big that win against Guelph really was. Because now if you go out and you take care of business, there's a chance for Mac finishes 4-4 if everything works out. You still have to take one game at a time here, but you very much control your own destiny.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to make the same comment, and it'll be interesting to see now how this team reacts. It's almost like York from last year, where you're kind of just taking your wins literally or figuratively where you can, and building that promise and saying we're doing the right things, and all of a sudden you find yourself in the kind of back nine of the season. You're like, oh wait, actually we've put ourselves in a position, or at least based on our schedule and our matchups, where, yeah, we very much control our destiny right now. One of the things that I think is interesting, you mentioned Mac being able to move the ball against Western early in that game, the nickel and diming of it, where, it just sort of kind of closing my eyes and thinking of like, well, what is it that Mac does to sort of move the ball downfield? Yes, they've been committing to run the ball a bit more this year, and at times very effectively or relatively effective. But it's those crossing route combinations. It's the Jackson Taylors of the world coming over the middle, and just him and LT with that connection that they're really starting to form up. Though I'm really waiting for a big Jackson Taylor game, and maybe this is the one we get it. But then on the flip side, it's like, well, how has UofT had their success? Very much also uses a lot of those crossing concepts. And aside from the fact that, as we've alluded to, that offense really peaked early in the season and hasn't, touched the success that it's had from the early returns that they got. there seems to be some similarities there. Is what the main difference? Because obviously UFT doesn't have a very strong run game either, and between the two of them, I might have more confidence in Mac running the ball. But is it just the fact that when UFT does it, it's Jake Oseen and Chris Joseph getting the ball, and not to, I mean, to kind of rank them with Jackson Taylor, it'd be an interesting sort of exercise, but in pure speed, whether you want to say, you think maybe I could see the case of Jackson Taylor being the better receiver. You could make that case in terms of his route running and hands or whatever. Pure speed. Once Joseph or Oseen get it, they're hard individuals to catch. Do you follow my like logic there on that? There's actually quite a few similarities between the way that they've been moving the ball. Teams that are much more pass heavy, using those crossers over the middle, and that maybe it's just a difference between the fact that a couple of these guys for UFT are just, especially Joseph, are as fast as we have in the league.
Yeah, for sure. I think you see that even in that Guelph game, especially. But yes, in this game here as well, you look at this receiving core, and I think it's very easy to say, not very easy, but it's easy to say. I think Jackson Taylor's the best receiver on this McMaster squad, and so let's really focus on him. And when you hyper focus on Taylor, that leaves an Aiden Nemeth to go off. It leaves an Everett Reed to go off. It creates more space in that regard. And it's the same thing with a U of T guy. Okay, we know Chris Joseph. We have to cover Chris Joseph. And then it's Jake Oseen coming free down the seam. And you're going, well, crap, there's somebody who's just blown us by and away they go. So I think there is a lot of similarities in this one. To me, one of the big differences here is that there's more facets to this McMaster offense. With U of T, you shut down that passing attack and the passing attack between those two receivers and Scott Barnett, and there's not much left. And this is an offense for McMaster that is slowly but surely starting to find a little bit more of a rhythm outside of just Jackson Taylor and the passing attack. And Thalman's starting to really do his thing and do it pretty effectively as well. So I do see where you're coming from. I do see the similarities between these two, especially in that passing game. I think honestly, the biggest difference of all is that McMaster's offense is not under this pressure of, if we don't commit, if we don't do something, we are going to get blown out, because that McMaster defense has been playing so well. It's been constantly giving Mac's offense more opportunities to score and to get things going. It's the same thing in that Guelph game. Mac's defense played very, very well, and it gave Mac's offense numerous times to get things going. And after a slow start, they were finally able to get something done.
On the subject of that Mac defense, do we slash do you, because I'm asking you the question, know what Carter Blad's status is at that secondary? Because that's an area where obviously we love what they have in that linebacking core. We've seen some really positive things out of that D line. But as we said, where this UFT team is obviously strong, and yes, if you can shut down that passing attack, you can really pigeonhole them. But the prospect of Max shutting them down for me is very contingent on whether 24 is back there, because of how much he impacts the passing attack. Do you have any update? Do you know of what was keeping him out or what might be his current status?
I don't have an update on that regard. I do know that he is dealing with an injury that he's been working through and trying to get back on. When you see him, I saw him on the sidelines. There's no cast. There's no big indicator of like, oh, this is what the injury is or whatever the case. So I'm assuming that he should be back and ready to go here relatively soon, and I'm hoping that. But even still, you start talking about these guys and how well they are playing. I mean, we saw, I believe he was at field corner, but Quentin Johnson, a second-year player out of Milton, playing for these Marauders and doing a pretty good job, albeit he is a young guy, but so is this entire team. Sean Underhill, like we've mentioned, is a second-year player. You've got Luke Payne, or Zach Payne, excuse me, who is a first-year player in this defensive secondary, and they're still playing relatively well in this regard. So getting a guy like a Carter Blad back would do numbers for this defense for sure. But the more and more that these guys play, the more experience they're getting in a Coach Grandy defense that seems to be getting sharper and sharper as things go on.
And the law firm of Lavers, Shields, and Sustanovich in the middle is as much as it's good having Blad over the top, if anything slips through you, you know, it, whether it's Joseph, whether it's Oseen or anyone else, Roberts catching balls over the middle, you know, you get a big hit from one of those three, and you might not want to go over the middle all that much more. Again, you run the risk of if they get loose and without Blad back there, it could turn into a much bigger gain for them. But there's a lot of trust in the guys patrolling the middle of that defense. So even if your guy as that safety net and Blad's not in there, really like who they have in that linebacking core, as we've been saying. Tom, I don't know how much more I have on this one. I think just in terms of my pick here, it's similarly just riding the confidence of what Mac's been doing of late and how good that defense has been looking with that linebacking core and with some of those guys on the front line, Chukwali and what they've been doing was being able to slow down the team's run games. I think they can maybe lighten up that box, similar to how Waterloo attacked UofT and really try to force them to have to run. We've seen Nyros have a good game against York, but really not much else. We've seen Barnett use his feet, but take some big licks in doing so at times. It may be Barnett's last start at home, and I hope all the success for him. But I'm going to take your Marauders on the road on this one to ride that defense, slow them down, and give themselves enough opportunities on offense to be able to get the points they need with Horvat as well, kicking balls through the uprights to pick up a win. I don't see this being a heavily offensive game, though, but I like Mac in this game.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, my friend. It's nice to be able to pick the Marauders and some confidence here once again. I'm not going to lie to you, but yes, I'm going with Mac to win this game as well. I think they're on the right kind of trend. As I've said a few times, I'm doing my very best not to be a homer in this one, but I'm excited about where these guys are going, and I like this a lot for U of T. I need to see something more than we saw against Laurier. That was not their best showing, to be nice about it. And I want to see them get back to form a little bit. I think even if they do, I think it's still Mac in this one. But it's your last home game of the season. Let's see something out of you.
Let's move into the final game of our OUA schedule on Sunday, October 5th. Live from TD Place, the 56th edition of the Panda Game. Ottawa, Carleton. Ottawa coming off the bye. Carleton coming off that tough loss at home against the Guelph Griffins. Tom, as we've alluded to earlier in the episode, when we get these high leverage matchups, rivalry games, there's always a bit of well, there's that much more of the any given Sunday, any given Saturday mentality to this game because of the energy, because of the 25,000 students, family, and community members alike packing that place that we're going to be live in the house to experience. When we've seen this matchup from these teams in the past, it often seems like the major advantage Ottawa's been able to have, and I forget what it's up to now, 8 in a row, 9 in a row, I think comes down to the fact that as we've talked about year in, year out, especially with Coach Belfay, it's an Ottawa team that doesn't lose games in the sense that teams beat them, but they will not lose games themselves. They aren't the type of team to make silly turnovers, penalties, be assignment unsound, not know where they're aligning, all these types of things that teams at all levels of football will do week in, week out to lose games. And in a high leverage situation like this, it's exactly being more like that type of team and less like the team that Carleton has a bit of a tendency to be, which is sometimes just a little bit too loose in moments. And we looked at last year where there was some strange decisions made down the end of the game for Carleton when they had an opportunity to take the lead. I can't recall. That I think just spoke to one of the key differences between these two teams. Tom, we've already alluded to some of your high leverage games that you played in, just thinking about the championships you've been a part of. For games like this, at a certain point, yeah, the players matter. Yeah, the people coaching it up, but there's a certain way that if you know how to comport yourself in these moments, that alone gives you as big an edge as anything you could draw up or execute or coach up on the field.
Yeah, the secret to winning big games, to being in Yates Cups, to being in Vanier's, the secret to winning those is to try to make them seem as similar as a regular season home game. That's the best way to go about things. Keep your same traditions, keep the same thing, however you conduct yourself. If you've got any, however you decide to go about your business in that regard, that's the best way in order to win this game. And so the team that comes out of this and is able to stick to their own traditions and keep this feeling like it is a home game, despite the fact that it is at TD Place in front of 24,000 people. That's where whoever gets caught up in the lights already is at a big disadvantage in this one. And I mean, when you're going to be playing a Vanier Cup that's likely not going to have 25,000 people in it, this is as big of a game as you could possibly hope for. And the fact that half of that 12,000 of those folks are going to be Carleton fans and 12,000 of those folks are going to be GG fans and they're going to be yelling and screaming. A lot of times they're probably not going to be yelling and screaming at the right times and there might be psyching out your own team. It's a lot of chaos in this regard, but you have to try your very best to keep this as similar as possible and get this thing going. I mean, in this, Carleton has not won the Panda Game since 2017 here, folks. It has been a very long time since the Ravens have hoisted up Pedro the Panda, and my goodness, I'd love to see it again.
I'm just realizing that I think that if that number tracks, pretty much they haven't won since At the 55 has been in existence. Ottawa's been winning the Panda. So you know what? As much Ottawa as I fell off the bandwagon, and I try to claw back in, and I get it. If you don't want to accept me, I made my bed. I got to lay in it. But also, you're welcome. Tom, we saw Tristan Lefebvre really struggle against a Guelph secondary that going into that game, we like a lot of those pieces, but I don't think was a unit that we spoke glowingly the way we do as some of these other units. Ottawa perhaps as prominent as any other. An Ottawa team coming off of a bye should be fully rested. Not that that affects the secondary so much as I think about whether that means Romeo Lucier is back for the offense. But let's go to that matchup in terms of Tristan Lefebvre in the passing tackle for Carleton against this secondary for Ottawa. Yes, we've seen much improved things from that rushing attack. And as I was saying on the Week 6 review, Keyshawn Reed is really becoming a guy that is just someone who's impressing me. Like he's that starting guy of the group with Morin and Roca, and he does incredible things in the return game. But he's really coming to his own shape here. But certainly, as it's been the case of years past, for Carleton to win games, it's a product of them really having success in the passing attack. From what we've seen from Ottawa so far this year, Patrick Cumberbatch, Denny Ferdinand, I'm forgetting Daniel Briere and the rest of the Jackson Brashear and these linebackers that have done such an amazing job for them, Nicholas Dion and the like. That to me is as big a matchup as any right now that beyond the composure piece, I think gives a major swing in Ottawa's way on top of the fact that like putting aside the fact that Carleton's coming in a little, well, I can't speak for them, but one would imagine a little rattled from the day that they had and somewhat like adding on to the fact that they come off a major day passing it so well against York, and then they kind of fall off back at home and trying to figure out, well, who are we really and what's the close. I feel like we get to the end of the season, we still don't really know who this Carleton team is. Hopefully they have a better idea of it, but if it's something to do with their passing attack, this certainly isn't the situation they'd want to find themselves in to try to figure out just who that version of this Carleton offense is.
Yeah, this is a Carleton offense that I can't really put my finger on the pulse of. I mean, when you start looking at some of the numbers here, in 5 games, Tristan Reddy has 24 catches, 558 yards, and 3 touchdowns. In terms of yards, he's sixth in all of USports. And he I don't really feel like he's been as involved in the passing attack because the passing attack hasn't really been there all that much. Even Frederick Hatchie is number 12 in USports with 404 yards receiving, 25 catches, and another 3 touchdowns himself. So when you look at these receivers that are here for Carleton, I certainly have a lot of confidence that they'd be able to get some stuff done. It just seems to be, how is Tristan Lefebvre or Elijah Barnes going to react to a defense as it's coming out? I think with a York squad that is admittedly struggling on defense, that helps. And that helps getting a squad really going in this one. To me, if we are going with the style of offense that this Carleton squad seems to be going in like a similar kind of vibe to Guelph, and the idea of Lefebvre being Tristan Aboud and Elijah Barnes being something of a Marshall McRae, I think Elijah Barnes being more of a factor in this game, if for no other reason than to just add a little bit more to the rushing attack, I think could provide a lot of stability to this team and to this offense that would allow them to do some more things in the passing game as well. If you start getting a Denny Ferdinand, you start getting a Cumberbatch, and you start getting these guys to have their eyes poking inside and looking at the box and starting to creep in to try to help and run support, that leaves the opportunity for a Tristan Reddy, a Frederick Hatchie, and the rest of those guys to really go off and to start catching balls and do their thing. I mean, Dante Spadaccini last game really started to impress me as well, and he has for the past couple of weeks here. So there's a number of guys in this Carleton passing attack that I think could be dangerous given the right time, but like the passing offense has just been on a wave of, sometimes it looks amazing, sometimes it looks barely functional. It's too inconsistent for me right now.
Well, and even if they are going to do that, and they were using Elijah last week as well, and do that aspect of kind of how I paint the picture for Guelph of saying, you're in a not idyllic matchup, just playing straight up against this defense. Who's your X factor? It's probably a guy like Elijah. And yes, Spadaccini, this sort of 2-game streak that he's been on dating back to the York game has been really impressive. Even if you're going to go that route, still having guys like Louis Prince, Riley Hildebrandt, and then Jalen Briere as kind of your core run stoppers is, a tough situation to be going up against, because we've been sort of using this framework a few times this episode, and as we've done, in various weeks, when you don't need to overcommit to one side of your defense to compensate for any other, ailment you might have or disadvantage against the team, and just be able to play straight up. That's the spot every coach wants to be in for any of their units. So it's tough to think that with the lack of consistency we've seen from Elijah Barnes, I like the idea. Obviously, I still have a lot invested in the young man with some of the takes I've made about the sort of upper limit of what I think he could become in this league. But darn it, this is an Ottawa defense that has been playing just some stellar football. And obviously helped by the fact that offensively, Josh Jansen, I mean, I had him as my 4th ranked quarterback in all of USports when we did that exercise a couple weeks ago. And helped by the fact that he has such a wealth of talent. Like, Tom, like, we know that Laurier has the best arsenal of weapons around them. We talked a bit about how Western's passing attack and their receivers, aside from Missouri, haven't really popped off. I mean, Robertson's had his games, obviously. We know just Seth Robertson is one of the best to be like that we have going, and that UofT passing attack, when it's been on, has been as good as anyone in the country, but it hasn't been consistent. After Laurier, is there an offensive skill unit you would take before this Ottawa team? Because I think there's a take you could make that, aside from the fact that, again, that Western's rushing attack is so darn good that if you say, okay, fine, maybe you might take some of these receivers in the combination with Aslan in there and all those types of things, and Josh Jansen, you might take him over Hillock right now in their careers. But if you can also, by taking the skill guys with Western, say that you get that run game, yeah, you might still obviously take that offense by the numbers. They are vastly better. They beat Ottawa. I'm not taking my crazy pills. I've been off my crazy pills medication now. But is the take at least half-baked to say that there's a good chance that this might be, as far as the totality of skill guys, the next group you go to after Laurier, especially if you say we're not including run game, we're just talking passing skill game guys?
So, passing skill game, guys. I think the easiest way for me to answer your question is just to rank where I would have Ottawa in this regard amongst the OUA teams. For me, it's Laurier. Number two, I'm still putting Western, even if you haven't seen the production that you're seeing there. Number three, I'm putting Queens.
Queens. Yeah.
And number four, I'm putting Ottawa. Not to say that this Ottawa secondary passing attack is not outstanding. I've just seen more consistency, and from top to bottom, those guys are great. To me, the bright shining star within this passing attack is Noah Avery. Noah Avery has been playing some of his best football here, and the connection between him and Josh Jansen has been really outstanding. But even getting to the spot where Avery is starting to box out in certain places and just using his size to his advantage, and you can see Jansen, even in that ball that what ended up being incomplete against Laurier at the very end of that ball is going down, but it's in a spot where only Noah Avery or his receiver would be able to catch it. And so the chemistry there is starting to get better and better and how things are going. But I like this passing attack, and I like Noah Avery a whole hell of a lot. I think what he's been able to do in the back end has been nothing short of amazing. I mean, in the overarching side of things, he's 35 catches, 484 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the year so far. And he's another one of those dudes that the more he gets involved, the more everybody else starts to open up, and the more that you're starting to see some of these other guys really come into their own and start to do their thing. So I like this passing attack a lot. I think that if Romeo Lucier is back, it only gets that much better. Robin Couliot has been doing some good things as well, and Regis Kadua. But to me, this starts with Noah Avery and the connection that he and Josh Jansen has, and then that raises the bar for everybody else and it just gives them better opportunities to get their stuff done.
Well, I think one of the things that's sort of sneaky impressive too about what Avery's been doing is that you add into all those stats that you read off, his long on the year is only a 31-yard reception, which again speaks to the way that they've been using him. We talked about how in that Laurier game, just finding those soft spots in the defense and to that connection you talked about with him and with Jansen, ball coming out. So as he's coming out of his break, it's right on him. He big frame dude, boxes guys out. That play you were referencing with, I think it was Legale on his back, who hell of a play by him. But still, like, though I'm sure, I'm certain, and hope it'd be cool if we get to meet Noah Avery when we're there. I'm sure he'll still say that he should have caught the ball, and in large part, I'd agree because he just did such a great job of boxing out. Jansen puts it low and away where he can get it and be in a spot to protect it. But again, just speaking to the nature of how they're using him to his strength, and then we still really haven't seen the Charles Asselin game that we would expect from him. Suleiman Kamara in the run game, I don't know, this Ottawa offense, I really think on their best day is darn near close to as good as some of those top teams. I wouldn't put them up there just with how good we know those other teams can be, but it really is a team that's looking to refine themselves as they get ready for the playoffs, and in a spot where, again, in controlling their destiny a little bit, they still have a few tough games down the stretch. Not to look past this one at all, but they very much control their destiny for hosting a first round playoff game. And you know that travel out to Ottawa for a playoff game is not on anyone's ideal situation for what you want to be dealing with in especially late October when the weather's changing and all those types of things. Carleton defensively, I don't really know what we can say we've been able to sort of nail down as that consistent identity piece for them. We know they've been struggling defending the rush. Guelph showed that even with a very banged up rushing attack, they were able to just run the ball very effectively. A secondary that we know is very banged up with Schneider Cave being out for now a few weeks going now. Xavier Malone's had a great game. He's one of the leader in tacklers. Chris Dupin's one of the best there is. L. James Agamotto. Some good pieces in there, but a defense that, it's like when going back to that U of T game, I found it frustrating, the idea that this was a Carleton team with new coordinators, and to say like, well, you know what, it's a bit more of a rebuild just because we knew how good they were from last year and the pieces that they had. And yeah, they lost a lot of big pieces. I think I'm just accepting at this point that, yeah, defensively, new coordinator in there, and they really just have needed to figure out who they are on that side of the ball. If I were to say what they do best, I don't know if I could really speak to it. I think that linebacking core, I guess, is the strongest part of that defense, but it hasn't really been reflected too strongly in their run stopping ability. I don't really know what to make of this Carleton defense. It kind of just speaks to the totality of the club, and to be tested against this Ottawa defense is certainly not an option that I love for them on this day. Tom, I don't know if you have any more sort of strong takes about this defense of what you've seen from this year or sort of what you would expect in this matchup, but as far as the very known commodity in Ottawa and how we've seen them be able to move the ball against great defenses in the league to a Carleton defense that we know is a bit weak downhill on them and leaves a lot to be desired. It's a bad matchup for them, to say the least, but I couldn't even tell you exactly why, other than just being like, well, Ottawa's just better in that component of offense versus their defense.
Well, it to me, it's first and foremost, it's the injuries that Carleton has been dealing with. Obviously, Schneider Cave being out, that's huge. But Chris Dupin also out in that last game against Guelph, not even dressed. He has a cast on his hand. I think he might have a broken hand or a broken wrist or something along those lines. So I
Yeah.
expect him to be out of this game as well. Xavier Malone has been playing like a man possessed. I mean, in that Guelph game, he finishes with 11 and a half tackles. I liked what I've been seeing from Brody Burke as well, but with how well that this team has been really going for Ottawa and this offense in particular, and with, I just think that King Charles is due for a big one. And I wouldn't be surprised if that big one comes on one of the bigger stages in the Panda game where he really starts to go off and gets back to seeing showcasing what he can do in that Russian game. I think that this is going to be a very big task for this Carleton Raven defense in order to try to stop and limit this. If anything, once again, you start talking about a blowout versus a tight game on either side. For me, I think this could very well be a shootout on either side or a one-sided affair. And if it is a one-sided affair, it's certainly the edge has to go to Ottawa.
You're not getting any, pushback from me on that one. The card of any given Panda game, anything could kind of happen, but the record is certainly not in Carleton's favor, both on the year and in the Panda games for the last decade nearly. And for so many reasons and more, in large part of my just love for all things Ottawa GG's football. Yeah, I'm going with those horses out the gate in this one on this matchup. Tom, I don't really have any other angles to say other than just I look at these teams and we know one is better than the other, and that translates into pretty much every component of the game. And I'll finish where we started, that at the end of it all, on a day with all the pomp and circumstance and all the crowd noise, I trust Ottawa like more than as much as any aspect of the game that I feel I give an edge to Ottawa. That part we started off in this conversation with is as big a discrepancy, if you will, as any other. And yeah, to me, it's Ottawa in this one.
Yeah, I'm taking the GGs to win this game as well. Might be spoiling our picks for our game day live, but
Was I not supposed to say that? My bad.
no, you're all good. I think anybody who's really looking at this and has been noticing these teams going back and forth, I think Ottawa is the favorite to win this game. I like the progression that they have. I mean, anytime you are one touchdown away, one catch away from beating the defending Yates Cup champions, it puts you in a pretty good spot. So I am taking the GGs to win this one for the umpteenth time.
Well, let's go ahead and take a look around the league, peeking at the USports schedule for this upcoming weekend. And we kick things off on Friday night with a doubleheader at AUS action, 7 p.m. We have Acadia visiting Santa Fe. Santa Fe's coming off the bye. Mount Allison traveling to St. Mary's, also at 7 p.m. On the Saturday, we get UBC going to Manitoba for a 12 p.m. Central time zone kickoff, wherever that translates to, in Eastern time or wherever you're listening to. Figure it out yourself. We also have McGill and Montreal, the rematch from 2 weeks ago, but this time happening in Montreal. Calgary's visiting Regina. And to cap off the Saturday, Alberta is going to Sask. Along with the Panda Game, you also have Concordia visiting Laval Rouge et Or. Tom, we seem to have a habit of starting off these conversations in the Can West. What's catching your eye coming out from the left coast this weekend?
Well, certainly it's the rematches so far in this game. I mean, the season started off with UBC and Manitoba going off, and I went into this being like, I think that's going to be the most exciting game of the year so far. And then we came out of this being like, well, I think it's the teams in Saskatchewan that really seem to be impressive. But starting off, I think UBC traveling to Manitoba. Haven't seen the best consistency out of UBC this year. I'm looking for them to pick up another victory, especially if Jackson Tatinsky is out of this game. But I'm very, of all the games that are happening, I think across the league, the thing that I'm most interested in is Calgary at Regina. Because Regina went into Calgary last time and they had to beat them in overtime. And I want to see, is this Calgary team legit? Or was that just home field advantage, stars aligned, and all of that stuff? Because we've said it a few times. The squad seems to be very weird from the makeup of this team and how well they've been playing. This Calgary Dino squad can't really put my finger on the pulse of. But if they can come back, and even if they don't win, but if they come back and they give Regina another hell of a game, to me, I'll really believe in this Dino squad, and I think they will be legit.
It's a very interesting rematch weekend in that regard. The Manitoba game against UBC from earlier in the season out west was, obviously the opening game of the season and where I really fell in love with this form of that rushing attack for Manitoba. Tuchinski being out, or I should say the prospect of Tuchinski being out, obviously is a major wrench in the equation because of also how much he brings to that rushing attack. I'm interested to see where UBC's going after a pretty well full game of Drew Viata, whether they're going to go back to Angle for this one after, a less than stellar outing by Viato last week. And for Calgary Regina, man, that first game, maybe similar to McGill and Montreal for some, might paint tint the game a certain way of thinking the matchups a little differently. I won't be surprised if, similar to last week, Calgary can keep it close early on or on the back of some of those stellar players that they do have, Zion Grant being on the forefront as much as any on that offense to maybe keep them in tight, get them a lead. Regina to me is just too much for them to handle in the aggregate, much like we saw with Saskatchewan. And honestly, I'm not looking past the Alberta Sask game, really just from the standpoint of Alberta picked up their first win last week and making the switch in quarterback, what they're kind of angling to do offensively as, we approach the tail end of the season. And at the time recording going into the weekend at 1-4 with Manitoba, and Calgary, both, and UBC, all those three teams where, aside from the tie-break scenarios, you are going to be tied with the record with presumptively at least one of those teams. Still leaves the door open for making the playoffs and figuring out what the structure of this team is in that potential playoff game is huge for them, and just for the general moving forward aspect and growth of the future of this team with Coach Bone and sort of trying to establish an identity. So I'm really curious against one of the top teams in the whole country, and going on the road at that, what they can really bring to the table. Tom, anything else out of those matchups that is sort of piquing your interest that we want to comment on?
Yeah, I love that you brought it up because definitely wanted to as well. The Alberta Saskatchewan game. I'm just so interested to see the growth of this Golden Bear team. I really like defensive end for Alberta. His name is Emerson, the big number 90. He's in the second year. He's been playing really well. He's the one guy that defensive coordinator Jean Poulin pointed out to me saying, this guy's going to be something special, whether it's this year or next year or the year after. He's really starting to come into his own. You can see his technique starting to get refined, especially when your defensive line coach is freaking legendary CFLer Amando Sewell. That also helps you out. So I think that there's a lot of potential on this Alberta team. I think that this is a Saskatchewan team that's just got too much talent in too many places. So I am giving the edge to Sask for sure, but I'm really interested to see how this game goes, and potentially a game 7 p.m. Central, depending on how the time zone works. We might be able to watch from our hotel room on the Saturday night.
Oh, buddy, I'm very much excited for the night out with the boys watching some Can West football from the what was it, the Marriott, wherever it is. I guess we should be giving away. We're gonna be staying. We're gonna get bombarded with fans busting down our doors. Tom, RSCQ matchups for the week. You know, if someone wants to get crazy, get nuts with it, you can make the case of, well, Concordia beat McGill, McGill beat Montreal, Montreal beat Laval. So, hey, Concordia, Laval. Let's be real here. Come on, Laval's rested. They're as good as anyone we have right now in the whole country. That one's not terribly interesting. And for the folks that want to look at this rematch between Montreal and McGill, I, you know, as we're learning more about this conference, I'll leave it to you to sort of set up the sort of McGill of it all, of that this team is going to find a way to either impress the heck out of you or leave you really darn disappointed. Montreal doesn't lose games at home, almost never. Like it is, and if anything else, they're coming in with something of a chip on their shoulder against these Redbirds. It'll be interesting to see again in this sort of the tracking of these two clubs in Laval and Montreal on the destined track they are to tee off against one another in the provincial championship. There's nothing I'm terribly interested in following with these two games, to be completely honest.
No, I share your enthusiasm or lack thereof in these. I think that McGill did play a hell of a game against Montreal just a few weeks ago in order to get that W, but Coach Marco Idaluca, head coach for the Montreal Cataban, is one of the best that we have in USports, period. There ain't no way he's going into this with the same game plan or not with the boys completely focused up and ready to go. And if anything, this is a Montreal squad that's going to want some Redbird revenge. And they're going to be coming out firing on all cylinders. They're not going to be hanging back or anything else. So you're going to see the very best out of this Cataban squad against the McGill Redbirds. And I think they're going to take care of business at home.
And that leaves us with our Friday night doubleheader of AUS action. Acadia at St. FX and Mount Allison at St. Mary's. Tom, we keep getting stuck in this cycle of seeing these clubs, these top three clubs in St. Mary's, St. FX, and Bishops take on the Acadias and Mount Allisons, with one or the other being on a bye. It seems to be just how the schedule's broken out. Until we start to see those three teams facing off one another and at full health again, because we didn't see Silas take on St. Mary's in their matchup, or probably didn't see Silas take on Bishops in their matchup. I don't really know, unless there's a major shock, what I'm going to come out of either of these games feeling one way or the other about, other than the fact that I guess I'll say this much. I really do want to see Jordan Shipley and that St. Mary's offense put up a strong outing against the Mount Allison team that we've obviously seen has been struggling to really find their footing this year. Obviously, new head coach in Coach Brady, and obviously a defensive mind, but they're not ready to compete with those top three teams. That's okay. I guess aside from that, that's the only thing I could see going amiss. Aside from, like I said, if Acadia comes out and really shocks St. FX, or obviously if Mount Allison does the same for St. Mary's, really, I just want to see St. Mary's start to get their offense looking a bit more like they did at the start of the season. I'm certain that defense is gonna be strong. Ryan Butler's been having an incredible year for them. A lot of those other pieces as well, and that St. FX offense we know is as strong as it gets out east.
Yeah, I have to imagine that you're going to see St. Mary's dominate in this one, just like you'll see St. FX dominate in this one. But it's more so the way that they go about things. I want to see, like you mentioned, I want to see Justin Shipley really start to get that passing attack going. And we haven't seen that really. And even in the championship game last year against Bishops, we saw it certainly sputter. I mean, you go to as many overtimes as you did, the stats are going to get up there. But if you want to come out of the AUS, especially with the three teams that we have kind of in rotation with Saint FX and with Bishops, you're going to have that offense firing at all cylinders here. So definitely want to see St. Mary's take care of business. For Saint FX, want to see them just continue to operate at a high level. I think that this is a Acadia squad that's certainly struggling in this regard, but I want to see Silas and I want to see that connection with Harrington. I want to see Malcolm Bussey really get out there and get things going. I want to see this X-Men squad operating at the highest level so that they know when they're coming into the latter part of this season, they're really doing everything they can to put themselves in the best position going.
Yeah, and honestly, when we take a peek a little bit ahead in the schedule, we get to see that St. Mary's Bishops rematch next week. So with Bishops getting to rest up this week for St. Mary's, we know that defense was, strong enough to shut out St. Bishops, but they also put up a large number on that Bishops defense with their offense, and that Bishops defense, as we've been saying, pretty much that's been an outlier game because otherwise they have been as solid, darn near as solid as they were last year. And last year they were something pretty special. So yes, I put the onus on them, but always a pleasure getting to see Salas hook up with all his guys, Zachary Hood as well in the mix, Fogarty as another strong runner. Tom, I think that'll do it for us. The next time these fine folks will be hearing it'll be during a game day live from the nation's capital, setting up the 56th edition of the Panda. Final thoughts going into this week 7 action in the OUA and everything else happening around all of USports.
Yeah, I think this is once again, we're starting to get into crunch time here. And I've had a number of people reach out to me specifically saying, hey, there's a scenario here where we could have like 4 teams all at 3 and 5. And depending on how that tiebreaker works and common opponents and all of that stuff, that's just going to become an absolute nightmare for us to try to work out in the latter parts of the next couple of weeks of the end of the OUA season here. But in that regard, every single win counts, and not just the wins now. Now it's what are your points looking like? What are your points against looking like? And so playing your very best football near the end of the season is always important, but especially for those teams in that mid to bottom section here where you're saying, well, we want to get into the playoffs here, but because of a point differential or common opponents or whatever else, we might get ousted. You got to be playing your very best football. And there's a few teams in here that haven't been as of yet, and they might get exposed pretty soon.
I mean, we always talk all year that it gets late early. It's just getting late into the mix. There's a couple teams that are ready to turn back into pumpkins, and there's a couple teams ready to get set for some playoff action. And it's very exciting to see how these teams prepare for this final stretch. Tom, I cannot wait for this weekend with you. I'm so excited that, as much as you've been hyping me up for this day coming up in Guelph with the reunion, genuinely, I'm so happy that you are part of that celebration with us, as you are a Griffin as well in your own ways. And just as my brother, I am happy that you are there with me and my teammates in that moment. And to say the least, the fact that you, me, and Dakota are making the trip out to Ottawa is something that I think is so huge for all of us. And I'm so happy for this. Thank you to everyone for your comments, for your feedback. Keep it coming. If you're going to be at the Panda, if you're going to be in Guelph, come say what's up. Tune in on Sunday around 10:30. Are we going live?
We should be looking at like 9:30, depending on how well we go.
9:30. Making sure you're tuning in on the YouTubes to do our sort of early review and setting up this incredible matchup we have with Carleton, with Ottawa from the Panda. So we'll be talking to you later this week right here or right over there in Ottawa at the 55.